First, to say that if you talk about climate change, you talk about biodiversity and land degradation. Overall, this is still talking about one subject because under biodiversity, we're talking about sustainable use. Under land use, you're talking about sustainable use. Equally, in climate change, you're trying to look at how best to address those negative impacts that would adversely affect biodiversity or land. So these are linked. But perhaps the linkage even is more when now you talk about addressing climate change and you look at how that connects to either biodiversity or land use management. Look at it this way. People are saying, okay, today the greatest challenge is on climate change. I do understand that. But perhaps even the greater problem today is on biodiversity loss because that is about livelihood. What would we be without biodiversity? But if you conserve biodiversity, in a way, you address climate change. Let me give you an example. If you say, okay, this particular ecosystem, it could be a wetland, it could be a forest reserve, it could be a rangeland. If you say this particular ecosystem is very important for us, either in terms of watershed management, in terms of either production of fish and others. I'm now talking in terms of forests and wetlands. And then people use it sustainably. There one would say we are tackling biodiversity conservation or management of forests. But then those are very important in terms of carbon stocks, carbon sequestration. So you see, the emphasis should not be on one thing, in my view. The emphasis should be really on looking at how you bring synergies between these two. In fact, I would say that if more support could be made towards, conserving the ecosystems, restoring degraded or otherwise these other ecosystems have been lost, you would, in a very, very big way, contribute to addressing climate change. Yeah, so this is why I say really that there is a very narrow or very thin divide when you look at it. It's the same to sustainable land management. All those would help us to address climate change. So I think it's important that these things are not looked at in isolation. There's a direct linkage, and we need to emphasize that. Yeah, and that's what, when I can give you the situation back in Uganda, that's what we are trying to emphasize most, that you do not need to approach biodiversity alone, you do not need to approach climate change alone, or this should be, there should be, these three should cooperate. And so those three conventions at the national level are really trying their best to come up with the synergies and see how they can complement each other.
And in terms of this conference, what are your expectations? What really concrete actions would you like to see come out of this conference?
Well, this today is day one, and we've just been having opening ceremonies. We've not even touched on any of those agenda items, but I think there are quite a number of things that I would expect to come out from this conference, but perhaps about 2 to 3 of them. One is that we have a strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020, which was adopted during COP10. Now, that strategic plan really it took us about 2 to 3 years negotiating on it, and it gives that guidance on what we need to be doing, at national level. So what we are supposed to do at country level is to look at the targets in the strategic plan itself and try to come up with the national targets, using, of course, the IHE targets at the flexible framework for doing that. And then that should help us to monitor progress towards what I was telling you, the loss, handling or reducing the loss of biodiversity, because that it has been realized that's not the challenge we have. So that is one thing I would expect, that from this meeting there should be agreement on how we fund it, because it was already, we spent a lot of energies and setting those global targets, and now the challenge is implementing it. Because if it is not, then it will be a missed opportunity again. Like there was a target that was set for reducing biodiversity loss by 2010, that came and went. But I hope this time doesn't take the same trend. So that is one thing I'm hoping from here, that if possible, parties should really agree on some very, at least serious way forward on how to fund the strategic plan so that we can see where we shall be come 2020. The other one is on resource mobilization. Again, it also links back to to the strategic plan, in that as we move towards more challenges on managing biodiversity, resources to manage or to handle matters on biodiversity is becoming increasingly important. So the other part of it now under discussion here is how can parties best support, mobilize resources so that all these good things that we are discussing is actually put into action. Most of the time the discussions go on well, we talk about texts, then some few years down the road you say, where are we? And nobody, because then the funds wasn't there. And so something that was so good and took so much of people's time to discuss it, people have not again committed themselves financially to. So, and that, of course, I would say, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, you look at Article 20, there is that financial commitment that, is made under there. So I cannot talk so much for the parties that they know their commitment under Article 20 of the CBD. I cannot talk for them, but I hope something comes good out of this. The other one, the third thing out of this is, of course, to try to look at again the aspect of access and benefit sharing. The protocol itself was adopted during COP10 in Japan. But again, still, we have got very few countries that have ratified it. Very few. But a good number signed. But now there needs to be a system or a mechanism agreed here to expedite the early ratification of that protocol, because it really gives countries the opportunity, especially the developed countries, the opportunity to see how we could make use of our natural resources or genetic resources in that matter, both for sustainable development, livelihood improvement, but also for the benefit of the global community. And that framework is really there. So there is some slow progress towards ratification. And you cannot implement if parties don't really ratify it. The number that is there is just about 6 at the moment, and that is not helpful yet. So, but that is something is going to be discussed during this meeting, and we hope that we could get a way forward. But there are many others, like restoration of degraded ecosystems. That is another one that is going to come up. So, but for me, maybe I would look at those three I've told you. And the other thing I have to say is that, of course, in negotiations like this, it's not very easy to determine how things will go. For now, those are just my views or expectation. But at the end of it all, I will see what happens. But maybe lastly, the other thing that I would say is that, again, we need to look at livelihood as one of those very critical issues that we need to address in terms of handling biodiversity, whether climate change or land development, because the scenarios are not the same if you look at what is happening maybe in the developed world and what's happening in these least developed countries. In the least developed countries, mine inclusive, you see, the issue is how do you make sure that the people you are telling them not to destroy the environment actually have alternative ways of surviving or income generation. So if somebody, say, has a private land which has a forest in it, and many of them could even be communal land, they have all that private or communal land which has forest in it, could be having components of wetlands in it, and you're saying, okay, please don't destroy. I say, okay, what do we do next? And you cannot give them incentives for that. So they will find other ways. They say, no, we have to produce either some crops or generate, because they need also to survive. They need income. They need to educate children. They need to health what any other person even in everyday life is striving for, they also do strive. So that one there, that improving livelihoods of people, local communities, if it is not properly handled, if we don't get a means to do that, increasingly conservation becomes a big challenge, because we are only talking on one side and not giving alternatives on the other side. So also that is the other thing that is being discussed here, and I think we need still to work on that as well, so that we are not just doing conservation per se, but looking at the human, face, or human well-being as critical, because all these natural resources, it is the human being using it, not any other person. So that's what I would say really about the questions you've asked me. Thank you.